Bonjour to welcome back to our channel. Today we are taking to the Museum of Eugène Delacroix. So, on y va. Today we find ourselves at 6 Rue de Furstenberg in the 6th arrondissement of Paris.
And we've come here to visit the apartment and the atelier of one of the most influential figures of the Romantism art movement, Eugène Delacroix. Run as part of the Louvre Museum, this beautiful apartment and the atelier were where Delacroix spent the final years of his life.
By the year 1857, Delacroix was seriously ill, and since he was charged with decorating the Chapel of Holy Angels, or La Chapelle de Saint-Ange, at the neighboring Église Saint-Sulpice, he needed to stay near that church as the long commute had become too difficult for him to do.
We will be visiting that chapel and the ancient crypt of the Saint-Sulpice later in the video, so make sure to stick around to the end.
He was happy to find, through his friend, the color merchant and paint and restorer, Etienne Arro, a quiet and airy space relatively close to Saint-Sulpice.
Delacroix was authorized to have the atelier built in the garden, since initially there wasn't one.
In addition to the atelier, he had major reparations done to the apartment and the garden, which took a lot of time and effort prior to him moving in at the end of December 1857.
Shortly after, he wrote to his distant cousin and mistress, Joséphine de Forget, "I think I'll be here very well. I don't hear any noise, another crucial point for a man who stays at home a lot."
In this atelier, Delacroix worked on the paintings exhibited at the Salon of 1859, the last one he participated in. But above all, Delacroix wanted to finish the paintings of his chapel at Saint-Sulpice, which he did with the space being inaugurated on July 22, 1861. The last 2 years of his life, Delacroix spent finishing a few paintings begun for merchants and collectors.
After the passing of Delacroix on August 13, 1863, the Society Saint-Vincent de Paul obtained the rental of the property until 1914, when the building returned by inheritance to Charles Ernest Georges Pancook, who in his turn ended the lease earlier than planned in 1928, a lieu of 1931. The property was under a threat of demolition to house a garage, so La Sauvegarde de l'Art Français Association demanded it to be classified as a historical monument.
In 1929, a group of painters, including Maurice Denis and Paul Signac, along with Delacroix historians André Joubin and Raymond Escolier, and art enthusiast Dr. Viau, formed the Société des Amis Delacroix, chaired by Maurice Denis, to prevent the destruction.
The city of Paris had also provided financial assistance to the association while annual exhibitions were held.
It was in 1971 that the museum became a National Museum of Eugène Delacroix.
20 years later, it acquired the historical monument status, and since 2004, the museum has been attached and managed by the Louvre.
So we just finished our visit. It's relatively small, but then again, it's where he lived and worked. So you just got the apartment, a few couple of rooms, and I think it's like 4 rooms, and then you've got the atelier. I loved it, but one minus is that there are a lot of people, I guess, because it's cold outside, so people are trying to do all the interior things. So there are a lot of people. Like when we were coming out, the queue was humongous. It was so long. We're now going to try and go to Saint-Sulpice, where he had some of the paintings that he was commissioned to do. So let's go and see. I hope they're not under restoration or anything of that sort. Let's go.
We highly recommend you to pass by L'Église Saint-Sulpice, which is literally a very short walk from here, 5 minutes tops.
This is the second largest church in Paris after Notre Dame, and since it deserves an episode on its own, today we would like to focus on something else about it.
As you walk in, turn to your right and you will be met with the works of Delacroix, the Chapel of Holy Angels that features the 3 of his paintings: Saint Michel defeating the dragon, Jacob's struggle with the angel, and Heliodore driven out of the temple.
Maurice Denis once said that this chapel is the result of the daydreams of Delacroix under the trees of his garden we just visited. It's incredible to be this close to his works and see them in the setting they were created for.
Looking down the nave, it is hard to believe that Saint-Sulpice of today is not the first church that stood here.
In fact, the building you see today was constructed between mid-17th and end of 18th centuries, and it's a second, much larger church built in this spot.
Before, there stood another Église Saint-Sulpice, remains of which are now kept in secret, locked behind doors, under this magnificent neoclassical structure.
And today we are going to explore the labyrinth that is under our feet, the Crypt of Saint-Sulpice.
As we descended into the crypt, we were met with the oldest part of the modern building, the Crypt of the Child Jesus.
Today it's used for repetitions thanks to the small organ that we were lucky to hear in action, as one of the visitors in our group happened to be an organist.
We were quickly reminded that we were in a crypt by a tomb of Emma Blanche de Berry, Marquise de Lévis-Mirepoix, who died in 1815.
As we proceeded deeper into the tunnels, we passed under the doorway that reminded us of the basic structure of the Holy Trinity and how the three, Father, Son and Holy Spirit, form God.
Before coming here, we had no idea of the scale of this place, except that it was the largest crypt in Paris.
It occupies approximately 5,000 square meters and is about as large as the church above it.
The history of Saint-Sulpice Church starts back in the 13th century when a chapel was first built, only to be replaced by a proper church a century later.
As the population around it grew, the church was gradually enlarged.
It must be noted that the old church was perfectly oriented towards east, as was required at the time.
However, the grand building that replaced it was slightly turned due to the development that had already been completed around the previous building.
In the Crypt of Bishops, the apse of the choir of the old church is perfectly visible, along with the two sculptures of the Holy Evangelists, Luke and John. These used to grace the North Tower, but had to be replaced due to erosion by copies following the restoration works.
Funerary writings are visible on the walls of the corridors, indicating burial sites in these crypts. Saint-Sulpice crypts were used, especially in the 18th century, as a resting place of up to 15,000 people of important social standing.
Today, very few remain, as majority of those tombs were destroyed during the Revolution of 1789, leaving only inscriptions for those who once laid here.
Currently, several activities take place in the crypts, with one being used as a theater due to its larger dimensions.
Here, spectators can attend events with religious and mystical subjects that respect the spirit of the place.
An ossuary is visible on the wall with human bones that were found in the church in 1937. We didn't include that in the video out of respect, even though the bones are visible through a protective metal fence. The Vatican II crypt features a series of beautiful 19th century frescoes that were unfortunately damaged in the following century, as someone had a clever idea of covering them with Meudon white mixture.
The traces of the old church are noticeable in other rooms, including interior columns and even 15th century staircase that led to the previous bell tower that stood here.
It's captivating to be here, as it feels like we are inside an underground church that is kept hidden from the world above.
The thought that the people above us have no idea there are these tunnels filled with history is fascinating, to say the least.
An extraordinary preserved well graces a large crypt. This used to be the forecourt of the old church where the inhabitants of Saint-Germain suburb would gather to take water. It must be noted that for more than 15 years, the Romanian Orthodox parish Saint-Paraschev-Saint-Geneviève has been operating in some of these spaces.
As we approached the end of our visit, we were met with the remaining two statues of the Holy Evangelists, Mark and Matthew, also replaced by copies on the actual tower above us.
And if you'd like to see this place in person, the association Saint-Sulpice d'Art, Culture et Foi Paris organizes free visits on a regular basis. We will leave their website in the first comment below this video.
So mission accomplished, we found the paintings of Delacroix, and something crossed my mind that this church, Saint-Sulpice, is absolutely gorgeous, and I think we should give it a little bit of more attention than people do. So watch this space. But for now, thank you so much for joining us, and if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share or subscribe. It really helps the channel, and until the next one, au revoir.